So the third I can statement that you're going to be working on is I can tell what genre I am reading and support my thinking using evidence from the text. You can really complete this I can statement at any point in your book, and I think this is one that you can really complete pretty early on in your book. As a reader, when I'm trying to figure out what the genre of my book is, the question I always ask myself first is this book a made-up story, or is this book something that actually happened in real life? Because if it's something that actually happened in real life, I know right away it's going to be a non-fiction text. But if I know the story is made up, I know that it's fiction. Now, as a reader, I need to be more specific than saying that my book is just fiction. I need to tell what kind of fiction it is. So then what I do next is I begin to ask myself a series of other questions. And the first question I ask myself is, even if this story is made up, could it happen in real life? And if I can answer that question yes, then most likely my book is going to be realistic fiction. If I start to notice that there are certain things in my book that couldn't happen in real life, like magical animals, or maybe it takes place in the future, then that might kind of clue me into that it's a book like a fantasy or a dystopian sort of book. But if everything that can happen in the book could happen in real life, then it's going to be realistic fiction. If I've determined that my book is realistic fiction, I then kind of want to ask myself, okay, if everything in this book could happen in real life, I know it's realistic fiction, but is there any certain focus to the book? Like, is this a book that could happen in real life, but it's focused on solving a mystery? Or is it focused on an adventure that someone goes on? Because if the book has a certain focus, then it might be a genre such as mystery or of adventure over realistic fiction. So for this I can statement, I'm going to be using our text that we used before, Freak the Mighty. So the first step of what I need to do is I need to identify the genre of the book. So the genre of Freak the Mighty is, and so I'm stopping to think about this, and when I think about the book, everything that happened in the book could happen in real life. So I know that the genre of Freak the Mighty is realistic fiction. So what I need to do now for step 2 is I need to give 2 examples from my book that show why I chose that genre and support it with evidence from the text, including page numbers. So as I'm reading through my book, I need to look for examples of things that show that it could happen in real life. And in Freak the Mighty, there's really a bunch of different possibilities for this because all of the events that happen in the book could also happen in real life too. And so I noticed as I read, I happen to be on page 19 here, and I'm noticing that Max and Freak are talking about television, and they're talking about Star Trek in particular. And I know that that's a show that exists in real life. I know that TV is something that exists in real life. In my life, I watch it. So I think that that's a good example of it being realistic fiction. So I'm going to work on the second part here. I'm going to say I know that the book Freak the Mighty, which I'm just going to abbreviate there, is realistic fiction, which I'm just going to abbreviate as well too, because on page 19, and I'm going to do a comma and then a quotation mark, and I'm going to then write down the quote. It says, "Of course, I have a television," he says. "How else could I watch Star Trek?" And then I'm going to put in parentheses. Oops, so I'm not going to put parentheses there. "How else could I watch Star Trek?" he says. And I'm going to say, I know this is realistic fiction because Star Trek is a real TV show and I watch TV in my real life. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to give another example of how I know the book is realistic fiction. And that's what I'm going to need to do for this I can statement. So just to review, what you need to do is you need to identify the genre of your book, and then you need to give 2 examples from your book that show why you chose that genre and support it with evidence from the text. And make sure that you really explain your thinking so that we can see how you understood what the genre of your book was. So this is I can statement number 3.